Joining us today is Professor Ann Skelton, a renowned expert in law and the UNESCO Chair in Education Law at the University of Pretoria. She's also the Chair on Children's Rights in a Sustainable World at the University of Leiden. And with her extensive experience and expertise in children's rights, Professor Skelton is here to enlighten us on a topic of great importance: children's rights and the preservation of the environment for future generations. We are, after all, just custodians of this planet for future generations. Professor Skelton, an honor to have you on the show today. You are known as a champion for children's rights. What makes this such an important area of focus for you?
Well, my entire career has been focused on children's rights. And I think what is new now is that there are so many issues that are coming into the realm of children's rights. So perhaps when I started working on this, I didn't think that something like the environment or environmental law would be a cross-cutting factor with children's rights. But that indeed now has become the case.
And it's interesting because if you think about what environmental rights are at their core, it's about preserving the environment for future generations, for future species, not just humans, but for all species that inhabit the planet. So I think this intersection of intergenerational rights and responsibilities is actually critical if we're to unlock how we actually get to a more sustainable world. You really are a strong advocate for building a sustainable future. Can you just explain how your children's rights works intersects with the battle to protect the environment?
Yes, well, back in 1989, when the Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted by the General Assembly, already there was an understanding that there were important connections between the environment and children's rights. And that was quite early days for that recognition. That there are two places in the Convention on the Rights of the Child where environmental issues are expressly mentioned. One is in relation to children's right to health, because it was recognized that children's health, particularly young children's health, is harshly impacted by things like air pollution. And in addition to that, in the education section, talking about children's right to education, the convention asks states to guarantee that children are educated to respect the environment, to recognize the importance of the environment. And what's been so interesting, Michael, is that in the last few years, children have themselves taken this issue up. They are the ones that are reflecting on it and saying that this is important to them. So they are the ones that have driven it to the top of the children's rights agenda as, one of the hottest, if you'll excuse the pun, topics that are in children's rights today.
Yeah, and they are going to be the future leaders, the future consumers. They're going to demand more from businesses and ask them how they're being more sustainable. They're going to demand more from society. And you look at the likes of Greta Thunberg, she's probably the poster child, no longer so much a child, but she really was when she first started, and she left school to go on this environmental campaign around the world. What do you see as the biggest environmental factors that impact children? I mean, you mentioned air pollution as a big one. What do you see as the biggest?
Look, I think there are a range of harms that children can experience. Clearly, climate change effects, ranging from just changes in the way that we are getting, hotter temperatures, flooding, droughts. These are things that children experience in their daily lives. And some of these events can be very disturbing to them. And what we're noticing as well in this particular generation of children is that mental health effects are very strong, particularly for adolescent children, but even preteens are actually starting to ask existential questions about, is it all worth it? Is there a planet? Is there going to be a planet worth living in? And, whilst that might be somewhat exaggerated and could be because of the way that they are receiving their information from social media and so on, it is a very real thing for them. And I think the responsibility of states is to make sure that states are that schools are presenting information to children so that they can understand this in a more balanced way. They must have all the facts at their fingertips, because they are also going to be the innovators of the future. So if we want to find solutions, and as we move through mitigation measures towards adaptation measures in the future, we're going to need innovators, entrepreneurs, people who can think outside of the boxes that we tend to be in. And so it's really important that they get the education they need.
Yeah, one can't have a fatalistic or Malthusian view over this. And I share your sentiments there around social media. And I think media more broadly, it has exacerbated this overload of oftentimes alarmist information. And I think it's incumbent upon schools, parents as well, to ensure that we help give our children the tools to be able to be savvy consumers of this information as well. Now, in your expert lecture, you're going to be talking about how child activists are at the forefront of this environmental protection agenda. What do you see as the key motivating factors behind children really standing up at this time in society's hour of need?
Children seem to feel that adults aren't getting the message that this is serious. It's as though children are trying to convey a message to adults that, listen, this is the most important thing that you should be focusing on. And so they are trying to convey a sense of urgency first. And they also seem to have a sense that this affects them much more than it affects us. And partially they are right about that, because they will live longer into the future. There is quite a lot of, blurring of children's rights and future generations' rights, which is a new big idea on the agenda. You mentioned earlier, Michael, that we have an obligation to preserve the environment for future generations. That is in the South African Constitution. And it is put that way. It doesn't necessarily say that future generations have rights to a healthy environment, but it does say we have obligations to preserve the environment, to ensure that they can enjoy their rights in the future. And there's a lot of new scholarship out on the rights, the interests or rights of future generations. And in some of that, we're talking about people who are not yet. Now, of course, children are born, so they have immediate effects. Climate change is impacting the lives of some children very severely. If we think about children living in small island states who are being displaced, for example, people who are moving because of drought and other disruptive weather patterns. So some children are very much facing the realities already. And then we have other children who are empathizing with this or feeling fearful about it, even though it hasn't really impacted their lives yet. And I think children also tend to respond to things that they see around them, things like dirty rivers, plastic in the sea. They relate strongly to animals being harmed by environmental waste and that sort of thing, in a way that perhaps adults tend to get a little bit blunted around some of those issues.
Yeah, sadly, it's a human condition. We do become a bit blunted, cynical, call it what you will over time. But it's quite interesting when you talk about future generations. I was chatting to a top climate and pension lawyer the other day, and they've drafted legal opinion that behoves pension fund trustees to think in a way that envisages their retirement fund members 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years from now, and what kind of world they're going to be retiring into as part of their fiduciary duties. And so what are you doing as pension fund trustees with this capital at your disposal to ensure that you're investing in companies that are not going to be contributing to global warming, as an example? So very interesting to see how all of this intersects. Now, you're also going to be covering obviously this obligation around what it means to preserve the environment for future generations. Could you just unpack what we should be doing to achieve this through that lens?
Well, I do think it's about the fact that we need to, whilst I agree that we shouldn't be overly alarmist, we do need to kind of take what's called a precautionary approach to these things. So we don't know all the science. There is a bit of crystal ball gazing that has to go on here when you're thinking about the future. But at the same time, if we're not sure, then let us err on the side of caution is the idea of the precautionary principle. And so I think that's part of what we have to do. We have to be imaginative enough to think about different effects that will occur in the future and how that will affect everything that we're going to face. And I think that we need to become more savvy as consumers and as users of goods and services to ask the questions about whether this is really that the business, for example, that is offering something, is it working in a way that promotes sustainability? And we see that businesses are getting on to, greenwashing. Many of them are doing greenwashing, which is like whitewashing, but it's in environmental issues, where if you go onto a website of, I don't know, shops that sell shoes or something, they'll have a little tab that tells you, this is what we are doing for the environment. Of course, they don't tell you all the bad things that they're doing for the environment at the same time.
Yeah.
So children as consumers will need to have the information, objectively gained information, in order to help them navigate what is right, what is true, and what is not. And this, actually, there's a counterbalancing that makes this very difficult, because they are big consumers of social media, where truth is not at the heart of things. And so it's more difficult for the generation of children today. They have massive amounts of information available to them, and they're big consumers of information, but they don't have the ability necessarily to discern what is true and what is not true. None of us really have. Yeah. Children are also very impressionable, so they may overreact in some areas, and they also might believe things at face value that are not true.
Information rich and maybe insight poor.
Yes,
but it's such a good point you make about greenwashing. I just recently finished Yvon Chouinard's Let My People Go Surfing. He's the founder of Patagonia. And here's a company that really has, since the outset, tried to commit to this principle of doing business differently and doing it sustainably. And he very candidly in the book talks about how difficult this actually is. When he started looking into the supply chain, where they're sourcing some of their raw materials, he says it's most of their supply chains are very dirty, but he had to be perfectly honest and frank with this. Many companies out there, I don't think, are, and increasingly it's the consumer that's got to put that the blowtorch of pressure on. Now, you also hold several leadership positions when it comes to children's rights, including being the chairperson of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is a hugely important position. So chapeau. Can you just tell us about what you do in this role? What does that entail?
The Committee on the Rights of the Child reviews states parties. So our main pivot is with states. And we look to see how are they implementing the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So they have to report to the committee, which sits in Geneva 3 times a year, and tell us how have they changed their laws, their practices, their policies to come in line with the Convention. And so that's one of our major roles. I would say that's our core mandate. But we also issue what are called general comments, which are our interpretations of cutting-edge issues from a children's rights perspective. And our most recent one is on children's rights in the environment. And it's been adopted. We're just waiting for it to be translated into the 3 official languages. And any day now, within the next couple of weeks, it will be out for public consumption. So that was very interesting. And we consulted with over 6,000 children around the world to be able to get their views and factor them in. And also we are speaking, as I said, mainly to states, but we do have a section in there as well on businesses' responsibilities. Of course, states have the obligation to regulate business in a way that promotes sustainability. And any state that's signed up to the Paris Principles has already agreed to do that. But many states are not making their targets. They're not reaching their targets. And so the committee is more and more asking questions about these kinds of issues, in addition to, of course, a wide range of other things that we have to ask them about.
I must say, on that note, I'm a strong advocate when you talk about the rights of the child and the role that business can play for businesses to have a look at things like paternity leave and the difference between maternity and paternity leave. The early childhood development phase is so important and really critical that we try and give our children the best possible start. And I think that's a role that business could possibly play. Now, you were also at the forefront of child law reform in South Africa through the South African Law Reform Commission. Don't know where you find all the time for all of this, Prof. Tell us more about the work of the commission that you've undertaken.
Yes, well, actually, that work was mostly done in the from the late 1990s, and the two acts that I was involved in were passed in 2010. So the Law Reform Commission is a kind of it has members who can come in and help with expert drafting of laws, but then of course the laws still have to go through Parliament, and they were adopted. So now the big issue really is implementation. How well are these laws being implemented in South Africa? Which is something I still hold an interest in, and I've done a lot of work on trying to hold government accountable when they fail to act in accordance with these laws through litigation as well. But I think South Africa has good laws on the face of it, and I think there is a genuine attempt to work in operation, but that sometimes we have failures of practice that let children down. And we could be smarter and we could do things better, particularly through a better trained workforce and a more specialized and professional workforce dealing with children's rights.
Yeah, I think in implementation and execution, so often we are lacking. And you read a headline, for example, of a child drowning in a pit latrine in a public school, and you think to yourself, how can this be possible in South Africa in 2023? There is still so much that needs to be done. I mean, for people that want to join you in the fight for children's rights, how would you suggest that they get involved?
I actually think it's important to get involved in your local community to find out what is happening there and whether there are projects that one can be involved in, but also just being aware as to whether children's rights are being upheld in the school that you're involved in, or the business that you're involved in. I think it's about looking through a different lens, because we don't often look at things through the lens of children and children's rights. So we need to turn a kind of practical lens that helps us think about things from a child rights perspective, which all of us have been children. So we do have some experience. As I always say, we've all been children once. We do know what that's like. And you can think of the things you thought were unjust. Well, children still think they're unjust, but they're still happening. So in many small ways, we can also make the world a better place for children, but also in more serious ways through ensuring accountability when we see people failing children, harming children, blowing the whistle about that, calling it out.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah. Absolutely. A powerful message. I think grassroots, too often we shrug our shoulders and say, oh, government isn't doing this or someone else isn't doing that. It really, the change does start with you. It sounds trite, but it is what can you do in your local community? Professor Skelton, thanks so much for sharing those valuable insights into the topic of children's rights and the preservation of the environment. Appreciate your dedication to the cause and all the work that you're doing to make the world a better place for our children. Take care.
Thank you, Michael. I've enjoyed our chat.